So what we're going to do today, I want to kind of shift our focus. I didn't want to dwell too much in one place. So I want to shift our focus to the base station that the player has. So as part of the onboarding process, a player registers as a user, goes through all that validation with the email and that. And then they'll be presented with a screen where they can associate with two things. One of them is their home train station, which will effectively become their base. And one of them is their drone club of preference. In other words, the club that they will be contributing towards in order to win the game. So the ultimate aim of the game is the first drone club to launch a rocket into space, which I think I said on the first video is the premise of how Deuteros starts. You'll start building stuff to launch into space. So I thought what we'd do is the first thing we'll do is test that a user can be associated to a train station and a club. So let's see, we can just create that as a test straight away. So let's bring up our terminal. So we can say, okay, so sail artisan make test user update test. Okay, so we should have that now in our tests. There we are, user edit update test, which is cool. Let's narrate our test. We're going to test that a user can be associated to a club and a station. So first thing we're going to need is a user. So let's do that. So this acting as user equals user factory create. We'll refactor that now. So given that we have a user, if we're going to associate it to a club and a station, we're going to need them as well. So let's create them. So yeah, we need to create the club and we also need to create the station. So let's, that we're going to associate with. Okay, so that's going to be two classes that are going to fail. So then when we do something, which is going to be a patch, because we're going to patch the user, but the URL we're going to do is, we've got that, haven't we? Users, and then we'll put a placeholder in there, and we're patching it, so that's all we need. So we can wrap that in an sprintf. We need to send data, so I'll put a placeholder for data in there. We need to put a placeholder in here, so that's easy enough. We can just make that the user key, and then the data is going to be built up from these two IDs. Excellent. So now we have our ID of the user that we're going to update. We've got the club and the station key that we're going to associate to it. So now when we run the test, it's going to fail obviously because it doesn't know what club is and it doesn't know what station is. So yeah, class club not found. So let's make that. Sweet. Class station not found, so we can create that. Okay, so again, let's import that into the code and run the test. Okay, so expected response status code 200, but receive 404. Yeah, the root doesn't exist, does it? So let's go and create that root into our web file. All right, sweet. I mean, I suppose strictly we didn't need to put them in right now, but we might as well. The test eventually would have forced us to know that. And that passes the test. So we'll do a git commit, and we're happy with that. It's not complete, but it works. As I said in the previous video, if it works, commit. We can worry about what it returns later. So let's go back to our test. We now know we need to do something. So we need to get this code to force us to do that. Now, I've just realized that we don't want to assert a status of 200 because we want it to redirect after it's made the change. So now by putting it to 302, we get a 200. So that's now going to force us to make another code change on the root, which is what we want. We can just do a return here. Okay, so if we now run the test, yeah, that passes, so you can do your commits. Let's see now. We know we still need to update the user, so we need to write the test that makes us update the user. So when it comes back, it's doing a 302. So we can't do it in this test because this is just kind of, we can't confirm what the result of this test is because it redirects. So what we need to do is make a copy of this test. I mean, well, you can write it out again if you wish, but it's just easier. Now we can start kind of saying what we expect to see as a result of this. So the changes we make are, we add following redirects. We change it to a 200 because now that's the page we're on, the resultant page. So we're now doing assertions on the dashboard result page because we've gone there. So we can check. The thing I always check when we're returning data to a page is that the right page is being presented. So the way we do that is use the dashboard. Well, in this instance, it's the dashboard. So we're asserting status 200. We're now asserting that it's using the assertable. We're just confirming we're using the assertable inertia facade. And the first thing we're checking is that the component is dashboard. So we want to check that it has a user. So we run this test. And obviously the dashboard at the minute doesn't have a user. So we can go to our dashboard controller, which is here. Yeah, we're not returning anything. So let's put a user in there. Okay, let's run the test. Test passes, decommits. I know it's weird, isn't it? It's like, why even do that? It's just how the TDD system works. So now what we're saying is has user, but we want to say that this user has particular properties. So we're saying the user has, so two things. The user has a club, and let's put an ETC on there for now. And we'll come back to the station in a moment. So let's just see if the user has a club. Test fails. Property user club does not exist. The user does not have a club. Okay, let's put one in. Well, let's go backwards from where we are. So we go back to the root file, which takes us to the dashboard controller. The user doesn't have a club. Well, the user doesn't have anything at this point. So we do need to do something here. And that brings us the first result that matches with the ID. I mean, it will be the only result, but first means to convert it into a single model. So now we have our user model. But because we have our user model, what we can also do is we can we can put a with. Load is when we already have the instance of the model, which at the minute we don't, we're querying for it. But we can add the club as its related data. So if we run that test, okay, that's cool. Call to undefine relationship club on app models user. That's great, because now what that forces us to do is go into the user model, and we can now say, so return this belongs to club class. We can run the test. Yeah, the test passes, so that's fine. Is that enough? Do we simply just want to say that it has a club? I kind of want to say that does it have the club that is the same ID as what was produced from this variable here? And we can say where, so we're now testing the club, so where the ID is equal to the club ID that we created in the factory there. So let's run that test. Okay, property user club is not scopable. So it doesn't seem to have brought back the user club in the response. And so somewhere in this chain, there is no user club. And that takes us back to the fact that we haven't actually done anything to the user now. So what we can do is say user club ID equals request get club ID, and then we need to save the user. So this Looks like it should work. Let's run the test. I was almost going to say, yeah, it does. Okay, so it doesn't work because the ID doesn't exist now. So what we can do is go into the users table. Let's just create another ID, foreign ID here, and we'll say that is the club. And yeah, we'll leave it nullable because when the user's first created, it is nullable. Let's run the test. All right, the test passes. Sweet. So we can now go back to our test, do our commits. That's what you're doing. And we can now say, now I expect the station to be the same thing. So we'll just copy that down. So that's the test. We expect the station to equal the station ID here. We'll just go through the whole process again. So user station does not exist. Let's go to the user model. Okay. Public function station. Return this belongs to station class. All right, let's run the test again. Property user station does not exist. So if we go to the place where it should exist, no, it's the dashboard, isn't it? Because that's where we're returning that data. So yeah, so now we need to say club, and we can add the station in there. Because although we're testing the user update, we're checking the data returned is from the dashboard. So user station is not scopable. I think now we go here. And we can change this to station ID. Let's run the tests. Station doesn't exist in the table. So we go back to the users table. And again, we just create a foreign ID to the station table using the station ID. Let's run the test. Okay, test passes. What else do we want to check? Oh, we need to talk about something else first. In previous incarnations of this game, I tried different ways of moving the drone about to different places. And I think in the previous video, we had the discussion as to why I'm using the location class. What that means is that the location class is going to be a placeholder for every geographic location that is used in the game, whether it's a train station, whether it's a stadium, whether it's something else that we can develop in a future version. They're the only two things at the minute: a train station or where a club is, a drone club. So because of that, it means that although we've associated our user with a station and we've associated it with a drone club, the station and the drone club themselves don't have a concept of location. They're just another model, another data model as far as the game's concerned. So what we need to do is associate those two to a location. So in other words, a station and a drone club will belong to a location. Not the same location, obviously, but they will belong to a location. And the best way I think we can test that is in the test we've currently done. Quite straightforward, actually, on top of what we've done. So the way we're going to check it is, we check on, let's do the club first. We check that the club has an ID of a certain ID. So what we're going to say is that the club has a location. So we can do that direct connection. Let's run the test. Well, obviously club location is false. So we go back to the dashboard again. So we want to say that there is a location, associated with the club. So that is how we would load that. If we run the test, it says that the location doesn't exist on the model club, which is fine because we've not set that up. So that's good. We can go to the club model. We can now create a location relationship. So this belongs to a location. So let's run the test, and the test passes. Let's do the same for our station. It's exactly the same principle here. So again, we're going to get the same error. Let's load up the station class. In fact, let's just copy that because it's going to be exactly the same function in the station. So this is the same code as what's in the club. Public function location returns belong to location class. Let's run the code. Well, let's run the test. And it says it does not exist. Did we add it into the web call? No. Let's run that again. It's test passes. Sweet. All right, so let's see now. What we've done is that there's a possibility of a relationship to a location. What we haven't done is said that there is actually a location on this particular model. We know there isn't because we haven't set one anywhere. So we need to test for that into the location object that's returned and check that the ID of that equals something that we're going to set as well. So we can copy this and we can copy that. So the location has an ID of club location get key. So what we're now is that checking that the location that was assigned to the club is the same ID as the location that's returned from the result. And again, we'll put an etc in there. So this is obviously going to fail because there's no concept of this at the minute. Let's just see what the tests say. But we know it's going to fail, which is fine. Yeah, club locations, no idea what it is. So what we need to do here, the easiest way to do this, because we're not checking that it belongs to a specific location, as in one we already know about, we can just add the location in the club factory. So if we go into club factory, we can say location ID is location factory. And that will automatically populate it if we don't specify it in the test. Run the test. And unknown column, location ID in clubs. Let's go to the clubs table. So table, and we can do foreign UUID to location ID. And a club always has to belong to a location, as does a station. So there's no need to put a nullable in there. Let's run that. Yeah, that works fine. Let's do the same for the station. So again, the station where ID has location, and we can, let me just copy this, paste that here, but we want to say that the has location, but that equals the station location ID. So this will fail because we haven't made that association yet. We go into the station factory. Well, let's copy this from the club factory. It's exactly the same, which is awesome because I'm lazy. So we can paste that in there. Yeah, we'll insert that. That's fine. Run test. And then we put the same column into the station table. So we just go to the clubs table. We'll just copy that. Okay, so now we've put the foreign link to the location. Test passes. Let's just check our test again. So we're checking that it has a location and that the ID of the location actually exists, which means the location exists and it matches what we created in the factory for these. So that's fine. We know that when the user comes to the dashboard, they are associated with a club, associated with a station, and that both of those are associated to a location. Okay, I think we're good there with that one. Let's just do that UUIDs on those two tables now. All right, so I think we're up to date. We'll just double check that that still works on the test. Shouldn't be any issues with that. There is. Data truncator for column club ID. Ah, UUID. Cool. All right. Again, commit your tests. I'm happy with that. We've made good progress there. So we could do some refactoring here. Let's put this into a controller first of all. So let's create a user controller. Sail artisan make controller user controller. Okay, so we can go to the web. We can grab this code. We can now associate it to the user controller. So user controller class, and this is going to be update. Go to the user controller public. And we just need to give it a name, which is update. Okay, well, we need to import the user. Okay, run the test. Now, let's see if our architecture test fails. Looks like it has. Yeah. So that's now forcing us to create a custom request object here. Sail artisan make request update user request. We can now import that here. Update user request, which means we can get rid of this, run the test. I think we should go to 403. Yeah, 403. So that is because by default, these don't authenticate unless you want to put some logic in there. I put my authorization logic in the controllers and the policies, so I'm not fussed for doing it here. However, we do need to return the data that is sent. So if we go to the user controller, we have a club ID and a station ID. So we're sending those two through. If we run our tests, I think we should be good now. Yeah. As I said in the last video, I'm still not sure how to test to force not to use request get and to use it as the validated data. I know I have to do that, and because I don't know the test to do it, I'm just going to do it manually now. Run the code. Yeah, test passes, that's fine. So we are where we are before. We are where we were before, but we've managed to validate that. So that's cool. Anyway, we've done well there. We've managed to associate a club and a station to a user and make sure that the club and the station are, well, have a location. In the game, you rigs are derricks, basically. It's the same thing. And you can build up to 8 rigs in your game and add them to your resource so that the amount you mine at any one time is, for every click, is multiplied by the number of rigs that you have. So if we assume that as part of the onboarding process, a player gets a rig or 1 rig, so we need a table, we need a property in the user model that holds that information. And then if they want to invest and multiply in the number of rigs going forward, they can do that. So we need a property in the user table that says that there's rigs and it defaults to 1. Now, given the fact that we've just been working on the user table, this works out quite well. So what we can do, let's just make ourselves a bit bigger here. So if we go back to the test, we know that at the point that the user is updated with the club and the station, when it's returned back to the dashboard, it has to have a number of rigs. Now, we could have done that when we create the user, but we might as well do it here as part of the onboarding, in case there's some alternate function where they get more rigs to start with, maybe some kind of promotion or something. So if we do it here as part of the onboarding, for me, that kind of makes a lot more sense. So what we're going to do is say, right, when the user comes back to the dashboard, so we have the user model here, it has a club, it has a station, but it also has a rigs property, and because it's not a relationship, can just go straight to comparing its value. And we'll just say it's 1 for now. Let's default it to 1. So this should fail. Yeah, does not exist. Let's go into the... Where are we returning this from? We're returning that from the dashboard controller. So it's a property of user, so we don't need to make a change here. So that means we need to change the database table. So we can just add this as an integer. And because it's not going to be created at the time the user's created, it can be nullable. Yeah. Let's see what the error is now when we run the test. So different now. Failed asserting that null is identical to 1. So what this test is telling us is that we're expecting the number 1, but what we got was null. So the onboarding process didn't update our rigs to 1. So because we're doing that in the onboarding process, that will go into the user edit, or it's a user update method. And so it's not a passed-in variable, but what we can do is just add it here. So again, if there's some logic at this point where we put a different value in, it can be done here in this function, well, which will eventually be extracted out into a class somewhere. But for now, we can just do rigs equals 1. Let's run the test. Sweet, that works fine. So we now have a number of rigs. Now, what are we going to do with those rigs? So every minute or every period of time, we can say it multiplies the number of rigs a player has by the resources that can be mined, and it adds them to a inventory at the base of the user. So that kind of says, right, we need to think of a few more data concerns here. So what we want to do is create a test that tests that we can create an item that belongs to a user and a resource. That's what we're going to do. So let's bring up the terminal. Sale artisan, make test, pest, item store test. So let's bring that up, item store test. All right, let's do our given when and then. So we know, well, let's start with the when. We're going to do a post because we're going to create something. And what we're going to create is an item. So we can just post that to the items controller. We're going to pass a raw object up as part of the data. So we need to create that. We pass that up and we expect to get a 302 because it should then redirect us. Obviously it's going to fail because it's a class item not found. Make model MFS policy item. Okay, and let's close that down. We can now import that item. Yeah, let's do a test again. Try the 302, well, once the 302 got a 404. So now we can go to the root file and we can say items. All right. So that should get rid of our 404 error. Okay, so that's all we need to know at that point. So there's nothing more we can check here. So let's copy this test. Now, in the real game, this function is never going to be used. It's purely for us to test the code that this function does. So it's kind of like a unit test, but from an endpoint. So the change here is going to be that we need to now follow redirects to see what happens after it's been redirected. We would like to get a 200 response. So if we run that test, so it gets redirected, but we don't know where. We just know it gets redirected. So if we put the user in here, this is interesting. I wonder what would happen if we put the user in here, this one now. So let's grab the user. All right, so we got a 200 instead of a 302. Yeah, okay. Because that 302 that we got that passed that test was because it wasn't authenticated. Now we've authenticated the request, there's no reason to 302 it because there's nothing in here that will do that. So then it's saying, no, you're not 302 and something's not right. So even in that first test, we should have got to the point where we're forced to do this return. So we're going to go to items.show. Now remember, in the game, this method won't be called, not in the normal play of the game anyway. But we know that it will need an item object, which then forces us to create the object. So the item object is item. Let's put the query on it because then we can at least get the IntelliSense coming up. So we're going to create an item, and the item belongs to the user, if you remember, because that basically says it's part of the user's base. We can just use the auth facade here. So facades ID. And it's also going to belong to a resource, which should have been sent up with the request. So we can say resource ID, and we'll just say it's request get. Okay, resource ID to the fillable property. Yeah, that's fine. Let's just run the test and check that it will. Okay, let's do it this way. So insert into items resource ID. So we need to find the items table. So we need to do the UUIDs for this as well. But for the resources, we can do a foreign UUID and do resource ID. Right, okay. When we get like a plethora of errors like this, it generally means we need to put the migrations the other way around. Oh no, it's because we haven't created a resource table yet. So let's do that. So that's going to say foreign. We might as well do these IDs now then, because that's going to error there. Okay, so just to summarize then, what we've done is just added the UUIDs to the item and resource table, which is the migration change and the model change. So we can close those two down. We can now run the tests. I still think we're going to get an error because we've put resource after the items. Yeah. So we need to change the name of this to be before items. So now we run the test. Yeah. Okay, column resource ID cannot be null. That's fine. I think what happened was we didn't send it up on the test, did we? No. And so we can put that in the item factory actually. So if we don't specify a resource in the test, we can just generate one in the factory. That'll be fine. That'll get sent up in the test. Let's see if we get the same error. So root items.show not defined. No, we got a different error, but we need to create that root. So let's go to the web file. Okay, so again, we're using root model binding. We've created the root. Let's run the test. All right, test pass. We've got it to pass the test, but we've not obviously confirmed it's created anything, but we can do that now with the rest of the assertion. All right, cool. And then what did we say we did first? We checked that it was showing the right file, which will be item show. Ooh, need a slash there. Auth login. So it's we didn't put the user in. Put it in the first one and not the second. Okay, not a valid inertia response. Let's not a valid inertia response. Let's get rid of that. So we need to go to our web file. Yeah, not a response because we didn't do anything. So we're going to return inertia render, and the file is item. Now, although we're not going to use this in the game, this is kind of helping us to test, because now in this file we can check for things that should be returned when we create an item as part of the test, so that at least we know that when it gets created as part of the console command later, this bit will, of part of the process, will work. So it's kind of like unit testing, but doing it from an end-to-end point of view. So we can say item.show, item/show, but we need to send the item parameter back. So we can say item item. Okay, inertia page component item show does not exist. That's fine. We can go to our pages, new directory, and then create a new view component called show. All right, test pass. If we go back to our test, now what we need to do is check that the item, well, we've checked that the item exists. We know it's creating an item. Let's just check it matches the stuff we sent up. So we can say has item. We should have done this before we passed in the item parameter on the root, but don't matter, it'll pass the test anyway. Yeah, that's fine. We can then say, well, the two things we know about this item are the resource and the user. All right, cool. So failing to see that it has a resource. So let's go to our web file. Item is showing the item. So we need to load the associated relationships. Call to undefine relationship resource and models item. We can go to the item class. Okay, so what we've done is created a relationship in the item class called resource, which belongs to the resource class. We run the test. And then item user. So we do the same thing again with item user. So we can go to the web. We can say load user. It will now ask for a relationship. Yeah, call to undefined relationship user on the item model. So we can go back to the item model. And we can put the same kind of relationship in here. Run the tests. All right. So what we've confirmed is that the item has a resource and a user. So now we're just going to confirm that the IDs match. Let's run that test. So item user is not scopable. Okay. Item user is not scopable. Let's have a look at that. Item user is not scopable. So it's been all right with the resource. So the user's here. We've got the user. Are we returning it back? Item user. Yeah, we're returning the user back. The item class has a user relationship, so we know that's fine. So why would that test fail then? failed asserting that null is of type array. So null is what returned. So did the user not get put into that? Let's go to the web. User ID equals auth. Auth ID. It's trying to insert the object rather than the ID. That's better. Oh no, it's the same array. Proper failed asserting that null is of type array on line 38. So user is null. Is it not inserting the user into there? Remember, we didn't put it in the fillable, even though I knew I was going to have to do it at some point. Let's try it. All right, unknown column, user ID in items. All right, okay. So can we, I just want to check that it equals the user ID now. Should still pass now. Yeah. All right, cool. So what we've done here with this test is we've checked that an item can be stored against a particular resource that we've created in the factory, and that when it comes back, it's associated with the resource and it's associated with the user who is authenticated at the time. Now, this method is never going to be called in the game. So the user is basically going to be the admin user. So, but we're not checking that it's returned to the particular user. Although, that's interesting. If we want to check that that user has the item, this particular test is no good because this will only authenticate. Oh no, well, because it's the user that's doing it will be the one that's doing it. On the cron tab, there is no user. The user is what's passed in from the array of users brought in as part of the cron to determine which users should get this addition. So I suppose so long as it returns the user of what's passed into the method, it doesn't matter. So that's fine. Yeah, we can leave it as it is. So we've done this part of the item of the cron job. The next bit is to come out a bit more and say, well, we need to get a list of all the resources that we need to insert into this user. So we need to test that we can get a list of resources that are mineable from the database. So let's do that. I'll tell you what, before we do that, I noticed just a few things I want to do. So I kind of like to put return types here. I'm getting into the habit of just trying to just kind of, give people a heads up on this. So I'm just going to add a few return types here onto these. So we've added return types to the model functions. I just kind of think it's just a nice tidy up, isn't it? I think that's everything else I want to do for now. So we've just said what we need to do is create a test. So the test we're creating is that we want to get a list of mineable resources. Okay, so already I can see where the cruddy by design mentality is kicking in. And what I'm going to do is not the obvious thing to start with, but there's a reason for that. So bear with me on this. So I'm going to call this mineable resource index test. So let me just explain this out. The reason I'm doing it this way, the reason why I'm not just saying resource, is because if I wanted to get a list of resources, well, that would be all the resources. What if I wanted everything, mineable, not mineable, those produced? That makes sense to be the resource index test. But if I did that, but then I said, oh, but I only want the mineable ones now, I can't use that same index test because I'm starting to piggyback onto an existing function. Now, it would be, you could just say, oh, well, you're passing a parameter, and when you're passing the parameter, you can filter that out. Yes, you could, but you then, if you start going down the world of solid and single responsibility, you've then got one method in a controller that is responsible for two different results. It's the same kind of data, but it might be for two different purposes, which means there might be two different responsibilities. Now I've actually called that mileable, not mineable. So it's a good job I just stopped there. I'll just change that. So what we're after here are mineable resources, and this will become apparent as we go through. So we have our mineable resource index test. Let's have a look at that. A list of mineable resources can be returned. So we're just going to put the user in by default now. So given we have a user, and that we have a list of resources, so resource factory, so we'll do 3. And we'll create them. But what we'll do is we'll put I don't want to do mineable, because if ever you do polymorphism, no, the polymorphism is the name of the thing with able on the end. So yeah, we'll do mineable. Oh no, but it might confuse people if they're used to polymorphism. I'll put can mine equals true. We'll create another 3 resources. Oh, these buttons are so tiny. Another 3 where, well, no, I don't like to put the same number, because if it returns the inverse, it'll be a different number. So at least we can check that. Where we don't put a can mine. So in that case, let's get rid of the qualifier. So what we're checking is when we get a list of mineable resources, when we get a list of mineable resources, we're going to assert a 200. That's the start. Let's run the test. So column not found, can mine. Perfect. So what we can do is say, let's see, how can we do this? We can say if we go to the resource factory, we can say can mine is just false. We'll just say it's false by default unless we say otherwise. If we run that again, it should still error. Yeah, can mine is not on the table. That's fine. So we can go to the table for resources and we can say table boolean can mine, and we'll default that to false. Okay, expected response 200, we've got 404, that's great. So now we need to create the root, run the test. Okay, the test passes, that's fine. So we can go back to the test and we can say, so we run the test now, we'll have to create that. Oh, not a valid inertia response, that's fine. If we go back to the web file, and let's just comment that out for a minute. Okay, so now the mineable resource index doesn't exist. We can go to pages, create a directory, mineable resource. There we go. Then create a view component of index. Run the test. Test passes. All right. Let's go back to the test. What we're testing, we just want to test that it has resources, but we want to test that it has 3. Now at this point we don't need to call it mineable resources because we're now dumping it down into the front end, and the front end doesn't care now whether it was mineable or not. In its name, it just wanted to know that it only got the ones that were mineable. So we can just call it resources, has resources 3. Run the test. Resources does not exist, that's fine. We can go back up to the web. We're just going to return the resources on a query. So we can say resource, I'll just put a query in there so you can use the IntelliSense stuff. Query where can mine true. And if we just put a get on the end of that. Okay, let's just refactor that out. Okay, test pass, which means we are only returning the 3. We're only getting the 3. So now we have a function here in the web that returns only the resources we want to use as part of the boosting the user's home base. But there's one more part to this, and that is to get the list of users themselves. So we need to create another test that basically just gets a list of users. So let's do that. Okay, let's go to our test. User index test. We'll just grab our just paste that in there while we've got it. So test a list of users can be returned. All right, let's do our breakdowns. We have a user, that's just our authenticating user. When we get a list of users, we expect to get a 200, and so what we need to do here is say user factory 3 create. Now this is interesting because we're also creating a user there which is 4. So in actual fact I'm going to say 4 because we create our user as well. So we get a 404, that's fine. So now we go to our web file, and this is now, what are we looking for here? This is the list of users. So user show, run the test. Not a valid inertia response. Inertia render. Run that test. Property users does not exist, so we need to go back into here. Run the test. Test passes. So we get our 4 users. So we can check. Well, no, we know we're going to get. Oh, yeah. So what we could do as part of that users is we could actually check that the user has onboarded, because up to that point they won't have rigs, they won't have associated themselves. So then in that case, should I have called it something else? Should I have called it registered user? Not registered, associated user, which means they've been associated to a club rather than just all users. Because at this point a user can be registered. I'm going to do that. I'll do it now while it's early on. So I'm going to say, no, not registered, associated. Associated user index, do refactor. Okay, let's see what this breaks. Oh, no, we need to put new. I've made a bit of a boo-boo here, so what I need to do is create a new user and put that one back into there. That does belong in there. So hopefully, if we now go to get associated users, that should fail. 404. So we need to go to the web, and for when we're getting an index of users, we're actually getting an index of associated users. And the query we want, so to test that, what we can say is we can create another, 3 users now. Where rigs is null, which means it's not yet been associated. Okay, have I done this right? Property users does not have the expected size. Failed asserting that the actual size 7 matches the expected size 4. Yes, because they all are going to say rigs is null. So what I'm going to do is go into the user factory, and I'm going to say, unless otherwise stated, rigs should be null. So let's do it the other way around. So if we say rigs is 1, and actually I need to put that in there as well for the actual rigs is 1, so 3, 4, so no, it should be 3 now. I hope you followed that. Now that we're not putting rigs 1 in our user that we're using for authentication, the only users with a rig of 1 are these 3. So we can change the number of users to 3. Rigs null, which is this by default, so I can take that out. There's now 4 of them, the authenticated and that. So if it comes back with 4, we know we've got the wrong batch of users. So hopefully this will come back as passing. So it's still come back as 7, which means the filter doesn't work. That's fine. We can now go here and say query where rigs. What we want is where, can I do where not null? Where not null, rigs. I can just say, so rigs has to exist. It has to be a number. Yeah, and that passes the test. So now if we look at our web file, we have the 3 methods we now need to build up this console command. Okay, so let's see if we can extract this out into a separate class. I'm not bothered about a controller for these because they're just utility endpoints. So what we can do is we can say, if we go to app, we don't have any services yet, do we? So app, new folder, app services, and new PHP class. And so what service is this? It's happening with the items, isn't it? It's the items that we're creating. So we'll call it the item service. Item service. And so the first thing we need to get is the list of associated users. So that's this query here. So what I'm going to do is say item service. Let's inject that in. And I'm going to extract that and say item service get associated users. If I now go to my item service, I can say public function get associated users. And then all I have to do is return that. Yeah, test still passes, so that's absolutely fine. Let's do it with the next one. We then want to get a list of all the resources. So we have this query here. So we'll create the name here. We'll call that public function. So we're going to get mineable resources, and we're going to return that. That's fine. And now we can just copy that and put it back in here. So I need to put in the item service. And then we can say item service there we go. Run that test. All right, fine still. Just refactor in here. And then finally, we want to get the get a list of resources. So it's this one. We want to create the item. So what we'll do is we'll copy that. Well, cut it. Public function. So we're going to store item. Now this will need some parameters in, but for now, let's just return the result of this. Okay, so yeah, we need to pass in a resource ID here. So let's just pass in the resource. And then we can just do resource ID. We pass in now the auth. I'm in two minds as to whether this is a good idea to just bring it in or whether we need to pass in the ID. I think we need to, at this point, we need to pass in the ID, but we'll pass it in as a user. we'll say user get key. So we need to pass in a resource and a user. So we go back to our web. So item, oh, we need to inject in that as well. So let's put in the item service. And this is going to be item service store item. So we want to pass in a resource, which at this point, I think that was request get resource ID. And we also want to pass in the user. So we're just going to say auth user. Now, why am I getting a... Oh, I have to create the user here. Okay, so we'll just say user find auth ID. Okay. Okay, so must be of type resource null given. Oh, I need to create the resource itself, don't I? So if I go resource find get resource ID, yeah, there we go. So those three items now we've managed to pass into a service, and these three can now be got from the console command. So let's create the console command. So over here, app console command store items. Yeah, so store items. So we can say, if we inject the item service now, so in the item service, we return, but I think we now need another method, which is the actual process that binds all these together. So if we say, and this is the one I don't think we need to test, because we've, well, if we type in the responses, we definitely only want to return a collection. Okay, anything that's got an input we've typed into, anything that's got an output is going to be type hinted. Let me just get rid of that. So we want to return a model. I would rather return an item actually. I wonder if we can do that. Can we return an item? That model's item, model returned. So if I get rid of that query now. Yeah, so we can actually specifically say we return an item object. That's better, I feel like better. So now if we say public function, and we'll do store items, store items, and then in our command, all this actually has to do store items, excuse me, we can now just build out these functions. As long as we follow the input parameters and the return types, then there's no major reason to test this. So we're going to say store items. So the first thing we're going to do is say this get associated users. What I'm going to do actually is say because I don't want to get the resources for every player, I kind of just want to get them and then just keep them to hand. Otherwise it's going to be very expensive on the database. So this get mineable resources. Okay, so then we say this get associated users, which returns a collection. We can then say for each of those, my favorite way of iterating, not. And so for each of those, we have a user we're going to need the resources. This is why I'm not a fan of this. Use resources. I will find another way of doing this. RESO resources. So for each associated user, we then want to loop through the resources. So we say resources each, but then we're going to have to use the user. It's one or the other. So we're now in a position where basically we just want to call the create. So we can say this store item, and it will want a resource, which we have, and it will want a user, which we have. Now we get an item return type. We don't actually need to do anything with that, but that's fine. So I now think store items, command store items. I think this will work. The thing is, because it's not on the test, when we're running commands, it's not on the test. Or I'm not quite sure how to do it on the test. I think you can set up like an environment thing here. So what I'm going to do now is run this command, but the first thing I need to do is run migrate, because we're now on our own database, not the test one. I will find a way of running it on the test one, but I can't remember how to do it. So sale artisan. So now you can use our command store items. Will it work? Well, it didn't not work. Out of your sight, I'm just going to load up my database viewer just to very quickly see what we have. No, I have nothing. Okay, so that didn't work. So we're going to have to just debug this. So what we can do is say, when we return, we can return. Oh, not return, we can dump. Let's dump the result of the call. And then in the call, we can return. What are we going to return? We can say items equals that, and then we can return items. Okay. Oh, we're not doing a test, are we? Force of habit. So let's do a migrate fresh. Oh, I know why. Because we're not creating the test data. All the resources and everything that we do in the test, we're not doing in the command. So what we'd have to do is create all of that in the seeder. Let's just see if I can quickly do that now. We've done the resources, got the user. Let's try that. Let's migrate fresh. Oh, migrate fresh seed. Okay, and then let's try our command again. So nothing was returned if I go to the database. Now, take my word, I know you can't see this, but in the database there is 3 items. That is working. That has inserted the items for 3 resources against my user table. Now, next time I'll make sure that I'm running those on the test environment so that it's all in the same database. But for now, it doesn't matter. We got it working. So thank you for sticking along. Please like the video if you liked it. Any positive feedback, any feedback really. If you want to say something about what I'm saying, please do. Doesn't matter if it's positive or not. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. For now, bye.